Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our seminar on money. I think everyone here knows us, so I was going to do an introduction about who I am, and this is my wife, who's an accountant, Alex. But I think since you all know us, there's no need to go into detail on that one. But just because we are talking about money tonight, we do need to start with a bit of a health warning. We're not financial advisors, and this is not official financial advice. So please don't sue us if you take some of this advice and it goes horribly wrong. This is not financial bank grade advice, just to be clear on that one. However, we have both put quite a lot of hours into this, so I hope you find it useful. And tonight we're looking at God's wisdom on money. So this is not the sort of wisdom you would typically find on the high street, but it is wisdom from the Bible and mainly from the book of Proverbs. So a book written by King Solomon some 3,000 years ago. And if I just share my screen, we've got lots of things open. That's clear, isn't it? Okay.
Stop.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about this. Okay, so a starting point for us tonight is that all money is God's money. And here we need to distinguish between the church and God himself. We're not saying that all money is the church's, we're saying that all money is God's money. And here's a quick cartoon to try and illustrate this point. So in Job, God says, "Who is given to me that I should repay him? Everything under heaven is mine," is his point. He owns everything. And then speaking to his people a bit later on, he says these words, and this part is particularly interesting. "I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds, for every beast of the forest is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills, I know all of the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine." And when you think that in the old days they were trading in animals, it's not just a comment. Chris, could we maybe mute some of that? It's not just a nice comment about animals, it's a comment about money itself. And so the point here is that whatever form money takes, whether it's in your bank, in your wallet, the nice shiny car in your drive, or even your house itself, everything belongs to God. It's all his. And we are really just, you know, we've got use of money for a while, but it's not really ours. And so the big thing here is that God owns all money. And that's a really positive starting point, because it means that God understands money. He's better than Warren Buffett, you know, on the stock trading market. He really gets it. He knows that we need it. And a big mistake would be to make money into God. When we do that, we end up in big problems. We have a broken world, and everything is destroyed because we are putting expectations on money that it can never, ever satisfy or achieve. It is not God. And so that's a big thing that we need to avoid. There are two big mistakes that we can make with money. One is to make money into God. We'll be looking at that later on tonight, but then the bulk of tonight's seminar will be on the second point, which is we can also mismanage God's money so badly that we fall into poverty, or even worse than that, debt. So a lot of tonight's seminar will be on how to manage money well, but don't forget the first point. You can also make money into God, which we definitely don't want to do. Okay. So let's start with our first truth about money. According to Proverbs, poverty is objectively bad. Now, this just needs to be said. We'll look at the proverb in a minute, but there is a strand of Christian teaching which is sort of reacting against an excessive love of money, and therefore delights in poverty. But actually, poverty is just an absence of money and is not a good thing in and of itself, just like illness is not a good thing in and of itself. So we just need to be free to say that poverty is objectively bad. This is what it says in Proverbs 10:15. A rich man's wealth is his strong city. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. And there is something even worse than poverty, though, and it's this. Debt is especially bad. And the reason why debt is bad, and this comes from this proverb, is because debt makes somebody into a slave. I don't know if you've ever thought about that before, but if you owe somebody money, you are a slave to the person you owe until you've paid it all back. And so the borrower is the slave of the lender. And you know, don't we, in recent years, how society has woken up to how awful slavery is. We're tearing down statues, we're doing all sorts of other things about slavery, and yet very few people have joined the dots between slavery and debt. But debt effectively puts one into slavery, and therefore the Bible has a particularly negative view of debt. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, how does somebody get into debt? And I once heard a seminar on money, and one of the most frightening comments the person made was that when he counseled, and this was a proper financial advisor, he says when he counseled people, he was surprised to find out that most people had no clue how they got into debt. They just got there somehow, but they didn't understand how they'd got there. Well, one way is this. We're going to be looking at this proverb for a bit. Don't worry, I've printed out the whole lot so you can see the whole lot, but it's really just these verses we're interested in. And this is through making a pledge. It says, be not one of those who gives pledges, who puts up security for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should your bed be taken from under you? Now, a pledge is a way that somebody can get into debt. So let me explain what it meant in the ancient world, first of all. This is where somebody wanted something so badly, effectively they gambled on getting the money with a pledge. So let's say, for example, a man wanted to extend his house. He's already got a house, but he wants to make it bigger. So he goes off to the stone cutter and he says, give me 500 blocks of your nicest stone with which to pay you. And the stone cutter replies, well, sir, that will cost you 10 pieces of silver. The man replies, I haven't got 10 pieces of silver, but I've got 2 pieces of silver. So let me have the stone today, and I'm confident that in a month's time, I will have all 10 pieces of silver, and I'll pay you in full next month. The stone cutter replies, well, that's no good for me. That doesn't work. You may not pay up, and I don't want to have to dismantle your house to get my stone back. So I tell you what we can do. You can make a pledge. If you fail to pay all 10 pieces of silver next month, then I will own your house in full. And the man foolishly agrees to this, but a month later, he doesn't have all the 10 pieces of silver. He's only got 7 or 8, and the stone cutter enacts the pledge that was made with a witness present and seizes property. And as you can see, the issue here is clearly greed. The person is greedy. If they'd waited a bit longer until they had the money with which to pay, this would not have happened in the first place. And I don't think it takes a genius to make parallels with the modern world. We've never had a situation where we've had so many things that are so tempting to buy. We've got gadgets galore today, left, right, and center with PlayStations, but there's also phones and cars, kitchen equipment, school uniforms for those who've got children, and it all costs money. And sometimes we want the stuff so badly, we just haven't got the money in place first. But sometimes it's not because of greed, it's just because life is hard. Jesus said, the poor you'll have with you always. There will always be poor people. And there are many tricks and tips for being able to provide for oneself adequately by handling money better. And we're going to be looking at some of those tricks and tips in just a moment. But first and foremost, the right answer to debt and poverty is work. Now, this is not a super popular message today because a lot of people think, oh, well, surely everything should be free. A loan should be free. I should never have to repay it back and so on. But the biblical position is that the answer to poverty and debt is work, that we should be able to provide for ourselves by doing a job. And even the Apostle Paul, who was set aside for preaching, made tents. Jesus of Nazareth grew up as a carpenter. Here are some Proverbs on this point. So Proverbs 12:11 says, whoever works with works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. And the point here is if we just do honest work, God has designed his world so that the mechanics of life should, in most cases, work out, and we should have enough. Of course, there are going to be exceptions and countries which struggle with poverty and so on, but generally speaking, the principle holds true. Proverbs 28:20 says, a faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. And here the point is that one of the most tempting ways out of poverty is to seek a get-rich-quick scheme. I remember at university, just such a thing came about where somebody was advertising a pyramid company, and he said, "Oh, you'll be rich in no time. Honestly, this is the way to go," and so on. And it was just a scam. And Christians should want to stay away from that kind of get-rich-quick work, especially if it involves doing anything immoral or dodgy sales or anything which promises something that seems too good to be true. Here we go. Proverbs 24:27 says, this verse is, sorry, I skipped a verse. Proverbs 21:20 says, precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. Now, this is an interesting one because it's talking about the heart attitude of the wise man, how he stores up good things and then consumes them at a reasonable rate. So if you can imagine that he's got 10 nice bottles of wine, he doesn't just have one after another and gets through all 10 in 10 days. That would be excessive. Instead, he sort of spaces them out and consumes at a proper rate. Whereas the foolish man has an impulsive desire. He quickly wants more, and that means he's got to replenish it all the time, which is going to put him back into debt. And then this verse, which we'll finish with, I think is particularly interesting because it clarifies the right position of work in our lives. It says, prepare your work outside, get everything ready for yourself in the field, and after that, build your house. Now, what it says here is there is a natural human desire for comfort and security and a home. All of these things are right and natural. And you might think to yourself, well, that should be my top priority. Let me build my house first and get that in order, and I'll use that as a base. And then after that, I will go and sort out a job or find a job. But what this proverb is saying is, no, you got the order the wrong way around. First, get your job, then find the house. Sort out your income, and then you've got the freedom to do stuff. If you've got a steady income, you're free and you can do all kinds of things. So it's quite an interesting proverb for today's world. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Alex, who's going to think about how to apply this into our 21st century.
Thanks, Carl. Okay. So we're going to apply into the 21st century. I'm imagining that there are probably two main types of question that people have, or two main areas. And this might be something for you, or it might be something that you'd like to be able to talk to a friend about, maybe. So the first one would be that you're in debt, or you know someone who's in debt, and you'd like to think more about it and understand it better, and particularly think how to get out of it. or you might be someone who isn't in debt, and you'd like to think of ways to manage your personal finances a bit better and be a bit more disciplined. So those are the two main areas that we'll be thinking about tonight. Okay, so just some quick definitions, really simple definitions. So what is debt? So what we're talking about with debt is a commitment to pay back money in the future. So there are different ways, we've got different words to describe it. The main ones are, so we talked about debt, maybe a loan, borrowing, sometimes people call it credit. And all of these describe the same basic thing, which is that we might have received money, or maybe we've received an item early, up front, and then we're committed to paying back for it in the future. So that's what debt is. And some of these products may charge what's called interest. So interest means, for example, that you might borrow £100 and you're committed to paying back 5% interest. So that would mean that you're committed to paying back £105 in the end. And then if you're going to pay back that £100 after 2 years, that means that you pay back £110 because it's 5% over 2 years. So that's just some quick definitions. Okay, so we'll just do a quick just to get people thinking. I've done a slide of different brands which represent different types of loan, different types of debt. So I think we can all unmute ourselves and just shout out, and if you could shout out the different types of debt that we can see on this slide.
Well, Lloyds Bank could be a bank loan or a mortgage.
Yeah. Or is there another one you can think of from a bank?
Overdraft, I guess.
Overdraft. Yep. Mm-hmm. Some of these are a bit tricky, but
maybe Dorothy Perkins, going to buy stuff, so credit.
Yeah, and specifically a store credit card. So sometimes there are certain shops, these aren't quite so popular as they were, but it used to be that quite common that you have just one credit card for one shop.
I think that's to do with Lloyds Bank.
SLC is student loans to pay for your tuition.
Student loans company, yeah. Barclay card, what's that? Anyone?
Oh, it's just a credit card debt.
Credit card, yeah. A bit trickier. Vodafone.
Sorry, say again, Alex.
The Vodafone one is a bit trickier. How is that basically a loan?
Is that your contract where you've received, say, a handset up front and you pay it off over a year or two?
Yes, yeah, exactly. I learnt this to my cost, or I was reminded of this to my cost when I dropped and smashed my telephone, but hadn't paid for it. So I was still paying for it. You know, I think I had it for 13 months where I was still paying for it, but I couldn't use it because I'd smashed it. Yeah, so that is a kind of loan. Yeah. What about an Audi?
Or any number of ways you can get into debt on cars.
Especially Audis.
Yeah. So quite often there is finance specifically related to cars. That's probably one of the most popular loan products. It's become much more common that you don't go to your bank and borrow money to buy a car. Now you go directly to the dealer and buy a car. Yeah. Okay.
They're a defunct now, I think, aren't they, Alex?
Are they?
Mm.
Oh, are they? I didn't realise. Okay.
They're payday loans, but I think they might be defunct.
Okay. So Wonga, and I think there are quite payday loans. Maybe they're a bit less. I think they've really clamped down on them over the last few years. But payday loans is another
That's
kind
why
of.
they went under.
Okay. Okay. Great.
And that's just very high interest, short term.
Yeah. So we'll just go through those. So we've had mortgages. That's buying a loan against a house. So it's secured specifically against a house. then credit cards, there are probably three different types of credit cards set up. So there's the one that you pay off every month. So you buy things for a month, and then the next month you immediately pay it all off. So that's one type of credit card arrangement. Then there's paying off the minimum. So sometimes you can be in an incentive period, so it's actually not too expensive if that happens. But also you can be in a situation where you're just paying off the minimum, and then the interest in that situation becomes really quite high. It becomes about maybe 20% once you get into that situation. And I've known a few people who've got to a point where they can't pay back their credit card, and they're being charged 20% interest over a number of months, which can really start to spiral. Then we've got different types of loans. So I think we've been through those. And then for overdrafts, there are two really different types of overdraft. There's an approved overdraft. So that's one that your bank knows about, and they've said, yes, you can go £500 overdrawn if you want to, and we won't charge you. They will charge you interest, but they won't charge you any fees. And then there's unapproved, which is when they haven't agreed that you can, but say a payment hits your account. I think this has certainly happened to me. And then they charge you fees, and they also charge you interest, and that's very expensive. And then we talked about store cards. The way store cards often work is that they often incentivize you to make purchases. So say there'll be, 20% off for your first purchase, and then it becomes much more like a normal credit card. And again, that's sort of that can be like 20% interest rate if you don't pay it off in time. Okay, and I think it's worth doing a bit of a deep dive on the different types of products, and really that some of them are much more expensive than other ones. And the point here isn't so much, if it's cheap, go for it. The point really is that there are certain types of debt that once you start getting into them, it can really spiral. So one of the ways that you can get out of debt is to make sure that the debt that you do have is reasonably cheap, because that it can really spiral if you're in the wrong kind of debt. So I think the most expensive kind of debt I think that's out there is a payday loan. So I think the cap is something like 1,500%. And the reason it's so expensive is because it's meant to just tide you over for a very short period of time. So that makes it become very expensive because the time period is so short. So say you might borrow, £100 for 2 weeks, and then you end up paying £120 back 2 weeks later, and that makes the actual annual interest rate incredibly high. So that's why it's so much to be avoided. And then unapproved overdrafts are also very expensive because it's really generally quite small balances, but you get fees and interest. We talked about credit cards you can't pay off in full. Personal loans tend to be a bit cheaper, maybe about 6-7%. So it can be a good thing to consolidate debts. If you're struggling to pay off a credit card, it can be better to get a loan so that you pay off your credit card. And then an approved overdraft, again, is to be avoided, but it's not as expensive as some of the other kinds of debt there is here.
So Alex, can I just are you saying that there's a spectrum here? Because remember with me, you said it was some kind of traffic light system. So can you explain that? So this is a traffic light system. So these ones on the left, you really want to avoid them. I think King Solomon would say, don't get into this kind of debt. They can't see your finger. So. Sorry. The ones on the left, don't get into that kind of debt, but particularly the top ones, I think you want to particularly avoid, or particularly help people if that's where they're starting to struggle. And then this less expensive debt, I think it's good to recognise the one in the middle, which is a mobile phone contract and possibly a car loan. I think it's good to recognise that they can be sort of inexpensive ways of purchasing things. Like, for example, I think I had a mobile phone contract that was cheaper than buying it outright. But I think it's worth recognising at the same time that it is debt. So if you can buy it outright,
that can often be better. Just means that you're not in a commitment that you can't get out of. And then the other ones on the right, I think, are a little bit more nuanced. So yes, you are borrowing money, but it could be that it's advisable. And I think they're a bit more, in terms of wisdom and folly, I think they're a bit more neutral than some of the other types of debt. So an affordable, I really stress like the affordable point, an affordable home mortgage, I think is often advisable. I think I know lots of Christians that have mortgages, and the reason for that is that you've secured your mortgage against your home, and if you really needed to, you could sell your home. You have an asset to pay off that debt if you absolutely had to.
So in Proverbs it says debt is bad, but what you're saying is that as things have developed over the last 3,000 years, it's now there is some nuance here with the ones on the right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there may be circumstances where this debt is actually even desirable, perhaps. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think we can consider it reasonably neutral,
Okay.
whether or not we get into that kind of debt.
So a Christian would not be sinning if they
or foolish, yeah.
or foolish if they got a mortgage.
Yeah, but I think the thing I'd say on a mortgage is it's very easy to overstretch yourself. So I think what's happened commonly, I see this quite regularly, is people commit to mortgages where it means that you'll see this with couples, where it means that both people have to work and they have to stay in a very highly paid job. Okay. So they're kind of committing to 20, 25 years of being in a very highly paid job to pay for the home that they wanted, when they could have gone for a slightly cheaper home, and then they're not so committed. And also they've got a bit more flexibility in how they use their money. Mm-hmm. I actually think that's quite a common thing nowadays, is as house prices go up. So there's this thing about loan to value. So you can quite often end up with like an 80-90% loan to value mortgage, which if you're buying a reasonably expensive house can mean that it's taking up like half or so of your salary once you drop down to one salary. And also I think often people take on debt that relies on interest rates staying low. Okay. So it's because it's such a long-term loan. But anyway, it's quite a big topic on mortgages. And a student loan, I think as well, the point there is I think you don't have to pay back your student loan in quite the same way. So someone isn't going to come for your house to pay for your student loan. So it's a little bit different, and it's been deliberately designed by the government in that way. I'm sure there are people on this call who are much more expert than me on this. I'm too old for his proper student loan. But
it's more like a tax band, Alex, is how it operates.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And then also a credit card you pay off in full each month. So yes, technically you're borrowing there, but actually it's quite sensible to use a credit card for things like internet payments, because you're protected if there's a fraudulent payment, whereas if you use your debit card, you aren't protected. So I think with those ones over on the right, with a few caveats, I think you don't need to lose sleep over being in that kind of debt. Whereas I think the ones over to the left, be really, really, really cautious, and they're kind of ranked. But I think it's worth having an understanding of these, as it's not just blanket debts. There's different types. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you fall into debt, or if you know someone who's fallen into debt, I think the first step would be being honest. So I think it's very easy to, because often our money is something that we deal with as individuals, and we don't really talk about it that much. It's quite easy for money problems to spiral, and also we can, because it's reasonably complex and there's quite a bit of nuance, and also you have to look at emails, access your bank statements. It can be quite easy to just ignore the problem, and it becomes more and more of an issue. So I think being honest about the situation, logging into your online banking, and having a look and seeing what's going on, is often a very important step. some practicalities on ways, if once you start to get into debt, some things that you could do. I've seen this work, which is restricting your access to credit. So, for example, if you're struggling with what you're spending on your credit card, then cut it up. It's a bit more difficult, isn't it, on online now, because maybe our computer remembers our credit card details and so on, or maybe your phone has it. But it's same thing. Like, delete your credit card from your phone, or I don't know how you get rid of your credit card details from your computer, but do that. Find out and do that. Again, take out the cash you need each week, and then you can actually physically see it as you work out how far you've got to stretch it over the next few days. Close accounts where you're having problems. And we've already talked about just getting into the cheapest kind of borrowing you can, and trying to avoid types of debt that really build up. I actually was talking to someone about, they were always in their overdraft, and I think they were paying £11 a month on £100 overdraft. And that was just an example of something where it's just better to go into your bank and say what's going on. Okay, and then the next thing to do is to talk to somebody. I think that can actually be really helpful in being honest with yourself as well, is to, if you open up to someone, a supportive friend. But there are also lots of resources to access when it comes to talking to people. You can access people with expertise. I think banks often, it can seem like the scariest thing to do. It's like going and telling the headmaster that you've broken some rule or something. But actually, lots of high street banks have a duty of care to their customers, and they can be quite helpful if you start to fall behind with payments. So with some caution, I'd say you can phone your bank. Citizens Advice Bureau that are set up for this kind of thing. Also, Christians Against Poverty. Lots of people recommend it as an organisation in terms of money management. I think there is a church I think there was one or two churches in Bristol that do Christians Against Poverty courses, and they'll work with people to help them get out of debt. And just speaking to a friend as well is a good thing to do. And we're happy to, as a church, we're happy to chat to people as well if they're starting to struggle in this area. Okay, I think that is debt. Yeah, so that covers the debt side of things. We could do maybe, does anybody have any questions or comments?
Sorry, Alex, I was just going to say on the personal loan thing, it will depend on your credit rating.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
someone with a very good credit rating may be able to borrow from a bank at 3%. Someone with not such a good rating will be expected to pay 20%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a slight caveat as well, as if you do want to, sometimes consolidating debt, the thing that can stop you from doing that is that your credit rating is bad. So it can really trap people because they're paying very high fees and interest, but they can't move on to a better product because their credit rating is bad. And
the other thing is that on credit cards, people get to, I don't know if it happens so much now, but at the time when they were throwing credit cards at people right, left and center, you could max out on one card but be unable to afford the repayment or whatever, but take out another card to cover that debt, and the same again, and people are ending up running up £70,000 worth of credit card debt with absolutely no hope whatever of paying it. And I suppose the other, and the same happened with the payday loans. They took out another payday loan to pay the initial payday loan, and then the whole thing just escalates. Yeah. I was just going to say on the subject of mortgages, sorry to be going on so long, that of course in the times of low interest rates, if you can get on the property ladder, depends how you structure your mortgage, if you're doing a interest and capital repayment mortgage, or if you just do an interest only mortgage. But certainly if you just do an interest only mortgage, your monthly outgoings are to be far less than if you're paying rent.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's one of the reasons why it's quite wise to get a mortgage if you can. Yeah. Compared with paying rent. Yeah. Great. Okay. Should we move on? Okay. So I think there are three aspects really to thinking about how to manage your money well. And the first one is what we're going to major on most tonight, which is working out what you're spending money on. What are you actually identifying? Where most of your money goes. And then the next one is working out your expected income, which is a bit simpler maybe. It's basically whatever your salary is, or your it might even be that you've got a student loan, or other types of things, and you can think about ways that you can generate money, like bank. We'll have a little think about how you can generate a little bit of money, but normally it's reasonably fixed what your expected income is, depending on what your nature of work is, or your stage of life. And then from that, so you work out what you spend your money on, and you also work out what your expected income is. And from that, you can start to build up a budget, which is a budget is basically a financial plan of your expected bank balance. If you project what you think you'll spend against what you think your income will be over a number of months, then you'll end up with what you expect your bank balance to be at the end of it, and then you can work out what you want to do on the basis of that. Okay, so thinking about what you're spending your money on, I think there are a few different ways to look at this. I think there's frequency, which is how often you spend money. So here I've got it here. So there are things you spend money on every month or even every week, and then things that you spend money on every year, that just come around once a year, maybe probably about once a year. So that's things like Christmas, going on holiday, maybe your car insurance comes around once a year. And then there are one-offs, things that maybe you expect them, maybe you don't, but they don't happen every year. And it's good to be ready for them. And the thing about the every year and the one-offs is they can often catch us off guard. So I think this can be one of the reasons why we end up needing to borrow money, is because we weren't, we've been just about managing, and then suddenly Christmas comes along, and then we suddenly find that we need an extra £200 to get through. Similar thing with unexpected one-offs, like being in a car accident, you need to pay to get your car fixed, and then your insurance premium goes up. But that sort of thing can sort of tip you from being okay to actually struggling a bit, or not being able to do the things that you plan to do with your money. So there's those different types. I think it's good to categorize them into frequency, to help you identify the types of things that you need to spend money on. But there's also whether I think we can categorize them in terms of essentials and non-essentials. Fuel is still in there. Sorry, we've been debating whether or not fuel is an essential or a non-essential. So we decided to take it out, but it seems every time it's crept back in. So I don't know what's going on with our PowerPoint skills, but anyway. But essentials are your rent or your mortgage. We need, i.e. shelter, food. We need food to eat, to live. Council tax. I think mobile phone bill is becoming an essential, or has become an essential in the last decade or so. I think before that it was a bit of a luxury. And then commuting, you might have to spend money to get to work, outside COVID anyway. So those are sort of essentials. It's good to recognise that they are things that you're not really going to be able to avoid. And then you've got your non-essentials. So fuel would be fuel to get to play, maybe you don't need to drive to certain places, so maybe it's a non-essential. Eating out, getting takeaways, birthday presents, I know a bit harsh to call them a non-essential, but you know, maybe you can say to somebody that actually can't afford it. I think subscriptions, that's my big one, I think, in terms of non-essentials. It's something that I find can quickly start to add up and I don't realize how much I'm spending. And then hot drinks, you know, getting coffees out. And I don't mean to demonize some of these non-essentials. I'm not saying never go for coffee with your friends. But the point here is it's just good to identify how much you're spending where you don't actually need to, maybe. Or maybe it's not so much that you shouldn't be spending the money, it's that maybe it's just not under control. So it's happening without you really realizing the extent to which it is happening. Yeah, and then we talked briefly about things like Christmas, etc. And it's just good to be aware of those ones that happen every year or as a one-off, just because they can catch us by surprise otherwise. Okay. And then just thinking about what to do once you've worked out where you are spending your money. So just with that, I think it's worth writing it down. If you don't have Excel, something like Google, there are some Google Excel type, I think what's it called, Google Docs or Google
Sheets.
Sorry?
Sheets.
Google Sheets, yeah. That's a good one to use. I think when you're first doing it, it's quite good to break down things like what you're buying at the supermarket. Like I wouldn't, you know, I think it can get really, really tiresome if you do it too much. But I think it's worth just having a quick look through what's happening at the supermarket. You know, are you spending half your supermarket bill on chocolates or something? Just having a look to see. I think we can assume that our supermarket bill is essential, but actually it could be that a lot of it is quite luxury. It just depends. Yeah, so look for areas where you could spend less. So where are you buying your food? You know, are you shopping at Fortnum and Mason when actually you could shop at Aldi and it'd be a bit cheaper? And how you buy your food and drink. So it could be that you're getting takeaways every week when actually you could reduce it down to, say, once a month or something. The other thing you can do is rank your spend by importance. So I think we talked partly just in terms of essentials and non-essentials, but also and just start to think about where are easy ways where you could start to save some money. So for example, things like with energy bills, if you pay by direct debit, you almost immediately save about 5%, I think, if you're not already doing that. I think another thing to recommend is that if you, particularly when thinking about things like your annual spend and the one-offs, it's good to save first. So as soon as you get your money, save first, and dare I say it, give first as well, so that the money isn't there anymore for you to spend. Yeah, but like as soon as it comes in, put it into a different account so that you can't access it quite so easily. Okay, great. So that was working out how much you're spending. I think that's really key to managing your money well, really. The other one is working out how much you expect to receive. So thinking of things thinking what might come in. So it might be various types of income to do with your work, maybe government support, child support, etc. There can also be other ways to supplement your income. So you can actually, it's surprising the difference it can make just by getting some bank interest. It's much more difficult than it used to be in our sort of low interest environment. Interest rates are much lower than ever, really. But there are still some accounts, particularly the ones that you save in regularly. You can get some reasonable interest rates, like 2% or so. And that can actually add up if you do it carefully. Also, there's quite a lot of cashback bank accounts around. I think the Santander 123 Lite one is quite good on things like energy bills and telephone and so on. And Carl and I use one of those, and it's £5 a month that we save pretty much every month. So that does add up. And also thinking about switching. That's quite an easy way you can actually get income from that. Not only might it mean that you save money, but you might get £100 or so for switching your bank account. But those are the sorts of things that you can think about. If you've got the time and the energy, they can supplement your income quite a lot. Okay, and then that makes you, once you've worked out your income and you knock off your spending, that leaves you with what you've got left, which is either, and you can choose what to do with that. You know, that might be something to give with or to save with, or that you know, or it might make you realize, oh goodness, I'm going to be short, I'm going to need to borrow, and then help you see that you need to find ways to save if you can, or increase your income. And then after that, as I think we've talked about this already, but you can then build up a budget on the back of that. So on the basis of what you're doing every month, if you keep going like that, where will you be in, you know, by September? Where will I be if you know, I earn 800, I spend 600, but by September, you know, I'll have saved £800 or something. Sorry, I can't work out how many months it is till September, but yeah, those are the different aspects of managing your money. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Carl now.
Okay, right, so I thought what we could do is just finish with a parable, which some people particularly asked for, and it's the parable of the rich fool, which kind of caps our evening. And this is the very last thing that we're doing tonight. So let me just read it to you. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness," which means greed, "for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store all my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store up all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So this is a short parable about money, but it's got a sting in the tail. The context adds quite a lot of spice. So let me just take a moment to set the scene. Jesus had shot to fame, as you know, after performing many miracles. He cured the sick, calmed storms, raised the dead. He preached in a way the Pharisees could not. And he really made a name for himself, and crowds followed him everywhere as he taught them about God. And then one day, a man in the crowd got to ask him a question. Now, if you think about it, he could have asked any question he liked. But the question he chose to ask, or statement he wanted to make in verse 13, is this: "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." It does say quite a lot about the man. I don't know who your favorite character in history is, whether it's Alexander the Great or Winston Churchill or Cleopatra, but if you could go back into history and ask them anything, I doubt whether you'd ask them to sort out your personal finances. And yet here this man is standing before the Son of God, who is far greater than Alexander the Great. And he basically says, "Fix my finances, Jesus." And that says a lot about him. Now, Jesus doesn't actually get involved in this at all. He sidesteps it, but it's not because he doesn't care. It's because he does care. He's got bigger fish to fry than this man's personal squabble with his brother. And he senses that there's greed under the surface rotting up this man. And so he gives the crowd a lesson on money and on life. Look at what he says in verse 15. "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, because for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So what he's saying here is, if stuff was all there was, then maybe gathering stuff is all that matters, but that's not the case. Your life is more than how much IKEA furniture you've got. Clearly, if you've got twice as much IKEA furniture as somebody else, that doesn't make you better than they are. And so he tells this story about a very successful farmer who gathers up so much grain, he's got an abundance of it, and the man forms a plan to manage his riches. Excuse me. He's going to build bigger barns. And that in itself isn't too bad. It's the attitude with which he does it, which is so telling in verse 19. Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. It's a very self-centered attitude. In fact, look how self-centered this man could be. Can you see how many times he self-references in this passage? 13 times he references himself. So he says, he thought to himself, I, my, me. That's all he thinks about. He is at the center of his world. And the sting in the tail is God's response. Because what you're expecting him to say at the end of this parable is, you wicked man. That's what you're expecting. You evil so-and-so, you selfish, evil man. But it's not what God says at all. What he says in verse 20 is, fool. That's what he says. He just says, you're a fool for living this way. And this is a real surprise, because God's rebuke highlights two mistakes that the man had made. First of all, it points out that we are not immortal. That was the first mistake the man had made. He just assumed that his universe and himself was immortal, whereas in reality, God can summon our souls into his presence at any time he wants. And sometimes the focus is so strongly on holding on to our money or making it grow that we forget that there is another factor, which is our mortality. Everyone dies sooner or later. And the second mistake that the man made was that he assumed that NatWest has a branch in heaven, and it doesn't. It's perfectly clear that his money will stay on earth. It will not come with him into the heavens. And so he says in verse 20, in this rebuke, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? And of course, the answer is someone else's. And so he says, so it is with the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Even the trillionaire, if we get one of those one day, cannot take a single penny with him. It all gets left behind. You're not immortal, and neither is your earthly money in its ability to come with you. Two big mistakes the man had made. And the point of verse 21, I think, isn't that we should give all of our money to the church or something like that, especially not if we take it to mean that it'll buy us a place in heaven, but rather it is a rebuke against this man's thoroughly self-centered attitude, which showed no interest in God's affairs. And so the point of the parable is to lift the man's eyes up in verse 13, who was only thinking about his squabble with his brother. And Jesus is saying to him, lift up your eyes. You're forgetting that there is something much more important here than your personal finances. Ultimately, being rich toward God means looking to Jesus and engaging with him. And of course, if there are any visitors here, then do join us on a Sunday and we'll talk about this in more detail. But hopefully you found this seminar interesting, and that's the end of what we've got to say tonight.